Hello and good afternoon everyone, and welcome to Infinite Learning's webinar. My name is Rebecca Anand. I'm the Managing Partner of Infinite Learning. We are delighted to be running this webinar today in partnership with Matt Hall and Jill Kelly from Making Stuff Better, and we welcome them to speak about managing change and how coaching skills can support the return to school. So today they're going to be exploring and explaining how the core concepts in coaching can be used to support your school community as they return. They'll be drawing on their work with international schools in China and in Singapore, and they'll be offering you a range of practical strategies that you can apply in your community. We've worked with Matt and Jill for many years now, and I personally am very much looking forward to the webinar today. Now, before I hand over to Matt and Jill, just a few small areas of housekeeping. Attendees are automatically on listen-only mode, so we'll allow Matt and Jill to deliver their presentation in full, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to use the chat area to ask a question at any point during the presentation, and we will use the last 15 or 20 minutes of the webinar to answer as many of those questions as possible. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Matt Hall and Jill Kelly. Matt and Jill, over to you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And yes, we're delighted to be working with you too. Hello, everyone. Nice to see so many of you here today. So we're going to dive straight in and we're going to talk about uncertainty. And I'm aware that, or we're both aware, that there's been an announcement in Dubai about the opening of schools in September, which in itself will no doubt be sending some of you into a spiral of how we're going to manage that. Those of you who are looking at this webinar from other countries will no doubt also will be dealing with the thought of how we're going to deal with schools opening in September. You might be have been dealing with children in the small class sizes at this point prior to the school closing for the summer. So uncertainty certainly at this point is very topical, but uncertainty is also something that is part of our everyday life. And if you just look at this, you've got, you think about home, yes, you've got the dreaded coronavirus, you've got family, friends. It's questions like, how do I deal with whatever I've got in front of me? So uncertainty is a hugely prevalent thing at the moment, but it's also, we need to acknowledge, it's there as part of our life anyway. So this webinar is to help us navigate that, help us navigate what we are seeing, what we are feeling. And the way we're going to use this webinar is in three overlapping ways. We're going to take you through the role of coaching and what that means and how you can use it. We're going to show you a couple of skills. Matt and I are both CTI, Coactive Trained coaches. We run, as I say, Making Stuff Better, which is a coaching company. We are coaching school leaders in international settings during this crisis, as Rebecca has said. And Matt and I are also both former school leaders, so we understand. So we have the role of coaching and how that works in school. We're going to give you some examples, so there's going to be some live demonstration of coaching for you today. And then, of course, as Rebecca said, there'll be the opportunity for you to ask questions about how this might work for you in your school. If you don't understand something, just ask, please do. It's really important to us that you get as much out of this as you really need, because ultimately what we really want for you is to go back into school thriving, not feeling like you're just holding on by the edges of your fingernails. Matt, did you want to say anything?
No, I'll jump straight into this kind of question, which is, what is coaching? And coaching is much used term in education settings and beyond. It's widely used correctly and it's widely used incorrectly. So before we kind of get into giving some examples of how it can be used effectively in schools, particularly in this time of uncertainty and transition, I think it's really important that we're really clear about what we're talking about. And I know that lots of schools and lots of people on the webinar, I'm sure, may have a coaching approach in their school or may have used coaching before. But let's just do the clarification point first. So coaching fundamentally is a way of seeing other people that is the opposite to this sense that we quite often have that we need to fix. And again, in the kind of current context, this desire and this need to fix things, to make stuff better, to use our company name, to change stuff, to get someone else sorted out, to solve their problems for them, is a really quite often a default way of thinking, particularly in schools, because that's what, you know, that's what drives you as a teacher or as an educator or as a school leader, is to make stuff better for your kids and your community. And coaching is absolutely a vehicle to doing that, but the distinction is it doesn't see people as broken and as problematic and as having to be kind of filled up with knowledge and skills. Instead, at its core, coaching sees people as fundamentally naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. So it kind of starts on the premise that the students you're working with, the community you're working with, the colleagues that you're working with, the leaders that are your peers, whoever in your school community you're working with, is not broken and doesn't need fixing. In fact, they've got everything that they need to flourish and to grow and to advance. They just need the right conditions. And we sometimes allude to kind of acorns and oak trees. You know, an acorn's kind of got everything it needs in it, or a seed's got everything it needs in it to grow and flourish. It just needs the right conditions. So developing a coaching culture in a school, or using coaching in periods of quite acute transition like this one, can be a really effective way of not putting all the responsibility onto the school leadership or the system, but actually taking faith that people have got the means to solve excuse me, their own problems. And you know, we're absolutely in that space at the moment, aren't we? At the moment, where we're kind of looking above, either literally or theoretically, waiting for a solution. What's the government going to say? What's the leadership team going to say? What's the policy going to be? You know, we're doing it on a kind of daily basis. We're UK based, and we're kind of waiting for the UK daily government briefings to tell us what to do. Whereas actually coaching just says, well, actually, maybe you know what to do. Maybe there's stuff that you can be doing at the moment that will move you forward. We don't have to wait for the cavalry to come running along and save us. So when we're in coaching mode, we're there as a facilitator. And again, that can be quite opposite to our role when we're in a teaching mode. Often in a teaching mode, we're about direct instructions, showing people how to do things. And we quite often take that mode and apply that to our relationships with peers in schools. But when we're in coaching mode, we see ourselves as a facilitator. So we practice all of these skills. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is create the conditions and the conversation for people to be what we call in conscious choice. And that is to say that we want people to be able to choose their relationship with the circumstances that they are in. Now, again, this recent period has proven without question that we can't always control our circumstances. But if we can develop and grow a culture and have conversations that allow people to realize that they can choose how to react to those circumstances, or they can choose how they behave in relation to those circumstances, or even just choose to see those circumstances differently and potentially in a more positive way, then we can make these sorts of periods of uncertainty and transition back into school a far healthier and positive process than they might risk being if we don't. And sometimes we talk about coaching in this way. It's about coming above the line, and above the line simply means that we spend a lot of our lives, professional and personal lives, kind of acting from a point of unconsciousness. And I don't mean that literally, but what I mean is we often sleepwalk our way through our decisions and our thinking. And what we do in a coaching conversation and what a coaching culture does is bring people above the line and bring them into consciousness so they can be aware of their thought patterns and their thinking. And sometimes I think about it as really effective coaching takes people and just gets them to step outside themselves and look back in, a bit like holding up a mirror, and gets them to really think about how they're behaving, how they're acting, and most importantly, how they're thinking. So that's what it is. Jill, just tell us what it isn't.
Okay, so very often, well, I say very often, you might see job adverts for mentor stroke coach or counsellor stroke coach, and they really are not the same thing. So it's extremely important that we make this clear. Coaching is not focused on the past. We're not going to take you back into your childhood unless something in your present requires you to say, okay, when was the last time you dealt with something like this? If the present topic requires that, but it's not focused on the past. It's not counselling. Counselling is a therapeutic, as is formal therapy. If clients in our experience start showing signs that they need that kind of support, we'll signpost them to it. Coaching is not counselling. It is not therapeutic practice. It's also not mentoring, which is the exchange of knowledge. And this is where the two often get confused. People think coaching is like a sports coach, where you might have someone saying, do your laps like this, run like this, and demonstrating and showing. Mentoring is the exchange of knowledge from one person to another, very often in a similar role. So it might be one senior leader, one deputy head to another, giving ideas and suggestions for something. Coaching is not about the person who is coaching you. It is all about the client. And as you'll see in this webinar, we're going to show you some key skills that demonstrates very clearly how it's all about the person you're listening to, not yourself and the ideas that you might have. So it's definitely not mentoring. And just to sort of demonstrate that more clearly, we've got a little diagram for you. So the first top line is about the thinking process in each of these. So a mentor might be thinking, well, my experience as a deputy head is this, therefore I can tell you how to write the timetable, or I know how to do this, so I'm going to let you know. A teacher, of course, is saying, I'm a subject teacher or I'm a primary teacher, I have the knowledge, I can actually demonstrate what it is that you need to know. A counsellor will, of course, help you heal from whatever it is that is hurting you. And a coach is distinctively quite differently asking, how can I support your growth? And where would you like to go from here? It's absolutely in the agenda and the hands of the person that you're coaching. A thing that they might say, a mentor, is this is how I do it. Teaching, this is how you should do it. A counsellor, tell me about your past. What did you go through? And again, differently, what the coach is saying is, well, what have you tried already? And how is that serving you? And what else is possible? Opening up the future for people. And finally, what do each of these people do? What are their actions? Well, a mentor gives guidance and advice. The teacher is direction. You can all read. Counselling is probing, psychoanalyzing, and coaching is very much exploring, experimenting, learning new methods, thinking, doing, really, really looking into what's possible from the present point onwards. Because ultimately, coaching grows the person, not the problem. So you might go to a doctor saying, my leg is broken, the doctor will fix the leg. What you're saying to us is it's all of me. Just I need to understand where I want to go, and the coach's job is to help you get there, not just one thing that might be presented. It's very holistic.
So in that way, it's we often talk about the kind of two parts of coaching, and that's the coaching way of doing, the skills. What do you actually do if you're having a coaching conversation? What does a coaching school look like? What would I see if I was in a school that was using coaching as a methodology? But actually, far often more importantly, a lot more subtly, but actually kind of absolutely crucially, it's also a way of being. It's also a way of thinking. So again, if you are taking a coaching approach to a transition or to a school environment, yes, there's lots of things you can do, and there's lots of skills you can use if you are coaching. We're going to look at some of them shortly. But perhaps even more importantly, it's a kind of headset and a heart set. Like, it's a way of seeing other people not as problematic and needing to be fixed, but as having huge value and being able to have the capacity to grow and improve. Again, very much like I always think the distinction is often we have that view of children, and that we can see children in such a way, but often when it comes to kind of peer-to-peer relationships, we have a different view. And when it comes to performance management processes, we have a very different view of how adults develop and what they need compared to the one we take for children. And a really kind of aligned coaching school would have the same view of both. So we're going to start to kind of get into that being and doing now, and just touch on this very briefly. So there's a range of coaching models that are used in schools. Many of them are linear, so you'll have seen potentially the GROW model, which is one of the most common models used, the growth model, They're really powerful and really effective models for using in all settings. There's a lot of value in them. We have taken the kind of best bits, if you like, and merged them with our experience of being school leaders, and this is the model against which we do our coaching. I think the key distinction is that it's not linear, because a linear model assumes that someone needs to do A, B, C, or D and move through a thought process to get to an outcome, whereas actually humans are really messy, and people are messy, and thought processes are messy, and we often do this and move all over the place before we land on what it is that we want to do. But ultimately, the model's built on the kind of left-hand column, and that is the absolute belief that in any organization, people are your resource. If you transform people, then you start to transform the organization. So if you transform people, you start to transform the school in this case. And if you transform the school, then you transform the impact on children and young people. So we kind of always work on the basis that it's the people are at the core of any organization. And if we can take a coaching approach to people, we can help to create transformation in that organization. And that ultimately work is deeply personal, and that's kind of links us up to the middle of the second column, which is when we're coaching in our coaching model, we always coach the whole person. So this idea that people, I mean, particularly at the moment, it's, you know, the lines are becoming really blurred, aren't they? But this traditional idea that you arrive at school and you drop your personal baggage and you put on your professional facade and you are just a teacher or a leader or a teaching assistant or whatever role you serve, and then you step back out of the school and you get back in your car and you kind of take off the uniform and suddenly you're Matt again. It's just not true. We carry all of the personal stuff with us into school, and we carry all of the professional stuff with us into home. And this period is proving that. I'm sitting in my home with a dog and children and potential interruptions any minute, and I know lots of other people are discovering that actually the future might be a real blurring between professional life and personal life, and maybe that's not a bad thing. But even if that separation was separate, existed geographically, our feeling is you always coach the whole person. You don't just coach them on work. You coach them on whatever it is that they need to be coached on. And as I said, it's a way of being, but it's also a way of doing. And there's a whole range of coaching skills that we can learn and practice and get better at. These are them. And we're just going to touch on a few of them in this webinar that we feel are of most value particularly when we think of kind of returning to school and transition points. And coaching in a school can play a range of roles, and we kind of boil them down to these four main ones: learning, leadership, well-being, and community. The gift, I think, of coaching is that wherever you use it to shine a light, you'll get the other three. So if you want to focus coaching on improving teaching and learning, and you design coaching around how you get the best out of what's happening in the classroom, you will get better leaders and you will get greater well-being and you'll get a better sense of community because of it. Similarly, if you want to, like a lot of the schools we work with in China are using coaching as a vehicle to improve staff and student well-being. If you put the focus on well-being, you will get a sense of community, you'll get better leaders, and you'll get more effective learning. So one of the beauties we feel of coaching is that, you know, with our experience of working in schools and our experience of being trained and experienced coaches, is that it's a really flexible device. And what you'll never get from us is a kind of off the shelf, this is how you should use it, here's the package. It's always about how you use this skill set and this mindset in your context. Okay, so let's jump into one of those skills, Jill.
Okay, so I bet you all think you can listen. And you can. You're listening now, hopefully. Until I was taught that there were actually different levels of listening, I thought I was brilliant at listening. And as a former head teacher, you'd often get a knock on the door at end of school or at lunchtime. Jill, have you got 5 minutes? And you'd sit and you'd listen. But actually what I realised after I was trained as a coach, that I was doing this. I was doing level 1 listening. So sorry, Matt, if you can go into the different levels. Yeah. So there's three levels of listening. Level 1 is internal, level 2 focused, level 3 global. Let's start with level 1. Level 1 is that kind of listening that all of us do where you are listening long enough for you to find a piece of common ground, a link between the person and you could say, oh gosh, yeah, I went to Malaga last year on a holiday. It's a fantastic place. Did you go to the spa down the road, or did you go to that restaurant? And which hotel did you? Oh, I stayed in that hotel. Wasn't it great? You start to make common links because that's what human beings do. It's perfectly normal. It's what you do as a social human being, which we're going back to, thankfully, in real terms in the next few months. And it's perfectly fine, but it's not fine for coaching. And I'll explain why. So that's level 1 listening. Interaction, conversation. You can bring you into it. It's all about me, about and the person that you're listening to. Level 2 is very different. So level 2, you see these two people are in a forest having a drink, I think, and one of them is really listening intently to what the other person is saying. Level 2 listening is where your ego, your history, your thoughts in terms of you in relation to the person you're listening to are gone. And you zone in on what they are saying, like with a razor-like focus. So you're not waiting to dive in and try and fix or give a solution, which is a really common and, let's face it, a really nice thing to do to try and help people. But actually, what happens in a coaching relationship is you listen. You listen for a whole range of things, which we'll go on to in a minute. But yeah, level 2 listening is where you take yourself out of it. And even if you hear them talk about something like going to Malaga on holiday, you register it and you let it go. And you focus purely on what they are saying with you out of the picture completely. That's where coaching starts at level 2. Level 3 is another level altogether, and that it's about the energy around you. That's why it's called global listening. So you know how it is where some people might walk in a room and suddenly it lights up the room, and you might know that also there's the opposite where people walk in the room and it can really bring a negative feeling there. Global listening is when you tune into body language, the energy of the person that you're listening to, what other things might be in the room, that feeling. Is there a heaviness? Is there a lightness? So you're just tuning into that. And as you become more and more adept at that, you'll be able to mirror that back to them. So a typical global listening observation would be, I'm sensing sadness in this area here. Have I got that right? So you tune into what's going on around you. It's like a third entity thing. So those 3 levels of listening.
Lovely. So listening is a really important part of coaching, and Jill and I will demonstrate it in a minute. And one of the things we do in our training courses is to give you an illustration of how we help people practice their listening. We make people have a conversation, but we ensure that one person is silent for 2 minutes, and it's amazing how hard people find that to be, just to sit with a stranger and listen without saying a word for 2 minutes. Another really important skill in coaching is reframing, and this I feel is potentially one of the most relevant skills for this time. And reframing is when in a coaching conversation you help your client, the person you're coaching, to see things from a different perspective. And more often than not always, but that's about taking a negative or anxious perspective and helping them reframe it and see it from a more positive and forward-moving perspective. So by way of illustration, sometimes we feel like we're in the shade. Sometimes we feel like we're stuck, like actually things are a bit bleak and a bit gloomy. But actually, if we move and we look at it differently, we find that things are really not quite what they originally seemed. So again, I think in these times, you can probably think of lots of scenarios where you feel stuck, or where you've got colleagues who are maybe seeing things in one particular way, and a coaching conversation might be the tool that allows them to see it differently. We call this reframing because I think it's often reframing for me always makes me think of camera shots. And again, kind of another illustration, you're taking a photo of a bowl of fruit. You can take one angle of it, but you could move the frame and take another one. Still exactly the same thing. Nothing's changed about the bowl of fruit. The circumstances aren't any different. The area around it's no different. The fruit's arranged the same way. The only thing that's changed is your is your view of it. Similarly, and I always like to point out that's a smiley face on the right because not everyone notices that. Yeah. So similarly, you might be looking through the window frame of a window, and you might get a fairly bleak and uninteresting view. Move yourself to another part of the building, look through a different window frame, and actually nothing's changed within the room, nothing's changed outside of the room, but the view you're getting is far more comforting, happy, positive, etc. So one of the really powerful skills in coaching, particularly in this time, is the ability to reframe, to allow a client to see their circumstances from a different perspective. And again, when we do this, when we train teachers to do this, they find it as a really powerful methodology to share with each other. It can be a really powerful thing to use if you're a leader in schools and you've got people who feel stuck in their teaching or feel stuck in their roles. But also it can be a really powerful tool to use with students, allowing students to look at their perspective, which even outside of COVID, quite often they don't have the power to change because they're young people and they're living in homes and they don't have the same free agency as adults do. But finding ways for them to see it differently can be really powerful. So let's just do an example of what this might look like in reality rather than theory. We'll always try to be as active as possible in our coaching rather than theoretical. So if I just stop my screen, then I can see you, Jill, which means you can see me, I hope.
I can.
Great. Okay, so we're just going to demonstrate reframing through a coaching conversation, and just for kind of people who are watching, kind of transparency flag here is like we never role play in our training and we never role play in the webinar, so I don't know. I feel like I'm about to do a magic trick. I don't know what I'm going to coach Jill on, but I do know that I'm going to see if I can use reframing for the next about 5 minutes. So get into out of webinar mode and into coach mode. What yeah, have you got a topic?
I have, yes. Oh, I feel a bit. So we're based in the UK, and Boris declared yesterday that pubs, bars, hotels, etc., will be opening from the 4th of July. And on the one hand, I am absolutely thrilled about that, thinking, because it's been locked down. I've not travelled more than 3 miles from my house for the last 3 or 4 months. And we've got this holiday booked that for ages ago with my friends, who I love dearly and I've not seen for ages. So that's down in Weymouth in July. So my thing is, I'm really excited about it, but I'm also a bit scared and I'm a bit nervous about going out into the world again, even though rationally I know I'm going to be sensible. I'm excited. How do I be with being excited, but also feeling nervous about going out into the big wide world?
So what are the nerves?
Either I'm going to contribute to someone getting sick, or I'm going to get sick. That weighs heavy.
Why is it heavy?
You know the stats. It's hundreds of thousands of people have died, and I know that the stats are also saying that we're now coming out the other side of it. But there's a skeptical bit in me that's going, but are we? Have we? Is it safe? Is it really safe? So it's that. Yeah, okay, let's do this. Let's get out there. Let's get the economy going again. But actually, is it safe?
So let's just reframe this. I want you just to imagine we're in 2030, so we're 10 years from now, and the Jill that's 10 years older and maybe 10 years wiser is kind of telling someone about this time, kind of anecdotally looking back about the kind of, what are we, June, summer 2020. What's she saying to that person?
She's saying, yeah, that in the end, the decision had to be about this group of friends. It has to be about what we can be happy with as a group of friends, not necessarily sorry, I'm blathering, but she's kind of saying we knew what the risks were, and we took almost like a risk assessment. We looked at the risks and weighed up that actually we could do enough things to make it safe, and that we were grown up and sensible enough to do it. And actually, seeing each other was such a tonic to our well-being that it was worth it. Yeah, she's saying.
How does that feel?
Lovely, and I feel emotional again. You see, I got emotional in another webinar. I do feel emotional because I've missed them so much. Yes, and it would, and that what I'm feeling sort of tears behind my eyes, and I'm feeling a bit choky. But that's because I know that's how much I need it, and we all need it. And I think on balance, we can be safe, but that will make us feel so much better. And actually, that feels, that feels lighter. It was heavy earlier.
So let's, as you know, Jill, one of the most important things about coaching is the action, the thing that changes as a result of it. So let's go to that future Jill. And what advice, what's she telling you to do? What's future Jill telling current Jill to do about this?
Go with it. Go with your intuition that you'll be okay. And just be, be aware of be alert. Take that awful word, but be aware of what's going on around you. But just trust your intuition. Enjoy the human connection. Don't look back.
Okay, great. Thanks. So let's just take coach hat off and unpick that slightly. But what I'm always curious, and as I said to people watching, like, that's not role play. So what's the difference now between 5 minutes ago for you?
That my intuition was right, that actually I knew what my intuition was saying to me, what my inner sense of knowing said to me was right. So why was I resisting it? So actually, I feel quite affirmed. I feel, I do. I feel excited. Actually, I feel excited.
So lovely. And so, and my observation is there's we often, this is my commenting on my own level 3 listening, if you like, but there was a shift. There was a shift in you went from tight and hunched and worried to kind of, it's a relief. You felt lighter. And again, as is often the case, and we're not trying to do this in coaching, but sometimes there is a release of some sort of emotion, which in your case was a bit of a tear, and there was something needed to move. And again, what I love about coaching is it allows the unblocking of something, of emotion, of thoughts, of something. But there was something you'd obviously been chewing on that dilemma for a while.
Yes, so it's been booked for a year, and we've been going, what should we do? What should we do? And then when the announcement yesterday, we said, let's talk about it. So I shall go with joie de vivre.
Okay, so that's reframing. So you can see the people who are watching. It's a really simple one. I just took Jill forward in time. So I said, what if we took the current circumstances and looked at them 10 years forward from now, coming backwards, and going forward in time. And reframing is a nice way. There's lots of ways we can reframe. Another common one is to do it through kind of space. So get someone to go up really high and look down on this moment. And suddenly a thing that feels really big and heavy and difficult suddenly becomes tiny. And again, quite often if we go forward or we go up, we can make people's issues feel like just one tiny little thing in a kind of big, more complex landscape and life. So that's reframing. Let's go on to our third skill. I'm now going to hope the technology works. Yeah, so I'm sharing my screen again, which is understanding our limiting personas. Jill, I'm going to let you do this.
Okay, so I want all of you to really sort of, if you haven't, I'm sure you have been already, but you're gonna think about yourself here now. Limiting personas are voices in our minds that are telling us that basically we're not very good, or essentially keeping us very small. And one of the big goals of coaching is to allow people to live as big a life as they want to, experiencing everything that they possibly could have desired. So the limiting personas are the thoughts in our heads that stop us from living those big, bold, brave lives that we want to live. And the root of them is our limbic brain. So those of you who are aware, the brain has a limbic part of it, which is the part of the brain that deals with threat. And when the brain perceives threat, we produce cortisol in our body, which leads to stress hormones and the feeling of feeling very stressed. And we have to try and convince our mind that actually what we're seeing is not a threat. The annoying thing about our limbic brain is it grabs all sensory input first, and we have to wrestle it from the limbic brain to our prefrontal cortex to be able to be rational and reframe it and so on. So the first key thing to do when you are thinking about something that's looming, you might be feeling nervous about it, whatever it might be, is to tune into which of your limiting persona voices are making you feel like this. Now, this is particularly pertinent at this time for all of you because you're returning to school. People will be catastrophizing, saying, I can't go back to school. Listen to me just talking about going off on holiday. I can't go on holiday. I can't go back to school. It's not going to be safe. What if I make somebody sick? What if the school isn't clean enough? What if the staff can't get there because they're locked in another country somewhere and can't get in because of the visa situation? And so on. So there's lots of what ifs out there potentially at the moment. What limiting personas will do is they'll magnify them to the point where it renders you immobile. You're paralyzed. You can't do anything about it. So these annoying voices, we have got to turn down the volume on. Okay, and the color, because they can be big and bold in your mind. So Matt and I are just going to take you through the 5 most prevalent ones. You might have other ones. By the end of the 5, really want you to think about which ones are standing out for you. And Matt and I will just talk about how we can help you turn the volume down on these ones. So let's go with the first one, Matt.
So the first one is the perfectionist, and this is that that kind of voice, that imaginary voice in our heads that's just saying everything needs to be perfect. So if you can't get it perfect, don't do it at all. So again, if you think about the context that Jill just talked about, going back to school, we need to have a plan. And everyone, the kind of people who are leaving schools, the perfectionist voice is really loud, which is I need to look like I know what I'm doing. I need to have everything right. The goalposts keep shifting, but every time they shift, I need to have a plan that's exactly as per the goalposts. And it's utterly exhausting. It's constantly trying to get everything perfect. Then it not only burns us out, but it also can lead to us not participating. So what often happens if you're listening to the perfectionist voice is you end up saying, well, I'm not going to do it at all because I'm going to look silly. I'm not going to get it right. So I'm going to step out of it. And it can really freeze us up. And for anyone who's spent any time in a classroom, which I know is probably most people on the webinar, teaching is a job that defies perfection. Yes, high standards are really important. Yes, aiming for high levels and high quality is important. But if you're only satisfied when you achieve that and you can't settle for good rather than perfect, then you're going to spend a lot of your time exhausting unnecessary mental energy trying to get there. So there's the contrary to the perfectionist is just allowing it to be a bit messy and allowing it to be a bit unpredictable. Often I think about it as dancing. Most people enjoy dancing. Most people won't dance in public because they don't want to look stupid or get it wrong. What if you just enjoyed the dance?
And the next one is the little child, and this is the voice that's saying, look, Jill, don't go out and work in that different field. Don't go move to that country. You'll get lost. You don't know what you're doing. Just stay where you are. Stay in your comfort zone, because you know where you are with that. Stay there. People know that you can do the job or whatever it is that you're doing. People can see that, and just stay where you are. They won't. It's the voice that keeps you well and truly in their comfort zone. People who have a really strong inner child can end up deferring to people, will wait for others to give direction, will sometimes need a bit of positive affirmation. Well done, you're doing a good job. So in this context of the school reopening, there'll be some leaders going, I really don't know what I'm doing. Oh my goodness. And it might make them want to step back and go, oh, I need to get advice from somewhere else. Of course you do in this situation, you need to get advice, the right advice. But equally, everyone's in the unknown at the moment, and having the courage of knowing that you are a leader first and foremost, and silencing the inner child will get you to ask the right questions. And if you don't know what you're doing, you know what to ask. If the inner child is raging loudly in your mind, it just paralyzes you, and you let others get on with what's meant to be happening.
So the third one is the workhorse, and again, these are the ones that Jill and I see most commonly in our work with schools. And the workhorse is a really common one, and that's the voice that says, you'll solve this and resolve this, and you will prove your worth if you just keep working. And it makes you mistakenly equate your value with the number of hours you do, as opposed to the quality or the productivity of the hours you spend. The workhorse voice is the one that keeps you up till 1 in the morning because you just want to get that last bit of marking done, or plan that lesson slightly differently, or whatever it might be, so that you can feel better about yourself, as opposed to it just being the right thing to do. Again, it's really common in school environments where there is literally more work than there is capacity to do in any, there's no limit on the amount of work you can do as a teacher or as a school leader. And again, small amounts of hard work, I'm not saying hard work isn't important. My goodness, we know that we advance and get better by applying ourselves and working hard. But if you are measuring, if you're allowing the workhorse voice to tell you that your self-worth is equated to the amount of hours you are doing, then you are working your way into a really exhausted place. So again, in the current context, you can see it a lot with the leaders that we coach. I just need to do more. I just need to do more. I just need to do more, and then I'll prove that I've got a control of the situation, or then I'll prove that I'm a worthy leader. Whereas actually, the antidote to the workhorse is saying, well, what if you put on your oxygen mask first? What if the best thing you can do for your school and your community and your children is to start to look after yourself first, and show that working hard isn't the only way in which you can add value.
And this one is the one that just keeps you towing the party line. It's the conformist voice. Don't speak out. Don't speak against the prevailing mood or tone or direction, because you'll be seen as a radical. You'll be seen as someone who's trying to rock the boat and be difficult. So keep quiet, keep in your box, and keep small. And that is incredibly corrosive. It makes you feel physically smaller. It makes you feel suppressed and repressed, and that can really build up frustration for anyone who desperately wants to say something. And I often talk about people's roar, and that roar can get stuck here with the conformist voice. It's like, I want to say something, but I'm just not letting that out. And the conformist voice is saying, oh, no, Jill, don't say that, you'll lose your job, you'll look bad, etc., etc., etc. When we're in a situation like this, there are going to be times when you're going to have to call it and say, that's not safe, or that is safe, or that's okay. You might have a parent that might be very concerned, and you might have to just say, look, we've got it under control. And that might be the last thing they want to hear, but actually it's the truth and it needs to be said. And they may react to it, but that's something that you're going to have to deal with. So the conformist voice is the one that's saying, don't be bold. Be quiet, stay quiet, stay in your box, and don't say your truth.
And so, just mindful of time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit here, but the punisher sometimes I see is the conductor of all of them, and often the punisher turns up as the imposter voice, and it's that voice that's just saying you're not very good and you're going to find out, and you're fairly, you don't really matter here, so it doesn't really make a difference what you're doing. And again, particularly I think when we are in isolation of others who will give us affirmation and support and praise, which is often what we get in a positive school community. At the moment in a crisis mode, there's not much space for that. There's not much time. Our time is devoted to Zoom meetings where we just need to deal with the business. And so if we're not being told that we're doing a good job and we're all okay and we're getting on, then often the punisher voice can creep in and start to take control and say, look, you're just an imposter. Like, you shouldn't really be here. Someone's going to find you out. And again, it can be really, really exhausting. So one of the advantages of coaching, or one of the skills of coaching, is that it will help people to identify these voices. And then our first strategy always in a coaching conversation is being aware of them. And the advantage is, as soon as you're aware of them, you're halfway there to manage them. And then the second way is then starting to be a relationship to them. So in a typical kind of coaching process, you might get someone to turn the volume down on the Workhorse, or imagine that the little child is a really bright coloured TV screen, and you're just going to reduce the colour of it and start to be, like I said at the beginning, it's like you're getting someone to step outside of themselves and look back in. If you're looking back in and you can say, oh, wait a minute, yeah, I am working ridiculous hours, and actually nobody's actually telling me to do that. And actually, I'd be much better off if I just rested, and then I could be far more present on Zoom for a meeting, or on the first day of inset, or whatever it might be. That would be a far more productive and positive place to be. In a coaching, it's the coaching conversation that often can do that and make someone step outside themselves and look back in. So, just mindful of time, that brings us to the end of what we planned, and I think I can see that there's been some questions in the chat. I don't know if Paolo or Rebecca from Infinite are going to jump back on and field them for us.
Hi, yes, Matt and Jill, thank you very much. We've definitely got a few questions there, so we're going to dive into those and see what we have got for you. Okay, so lots of thank yous and really useful. Thanks, guys. Okay, a question from Susie here. What was the level 1 of listening, please? So I think we want to just very quickly recap. Obviously, there'll be some information in the PDF, a follow-up that we send out for PowerPoint, but I think Susie must have just missed that level 1 of listening.
Yeah, so level one listening, we call it internal listening, which is when you're in a conversation and you're just thinking about how it relates to you. So it's the listening that we normally do all the time. Go out for a coffee, catch up with a friend, you're trying to find common ground. So it's the normal listening we do that we want to try not to do in a coaching conversation.
Great, okay. One here from Sarah. What would you do if you were trying to reframe a situation for someone who struggled to try to see into the future? So obviously that very effective and actually quite emotional coaching demo that you guys did there. Very effective. I guess Sarah's question is, if someone responds saying, well, you know, I don't know what I would say in 10 years, and sort of isn't very, obviously Jill was, you know, to give it due consideration and responded accordingly. If you find someone who's reluctant to do that.
Lots of ways, yeah.
Do you want to answer that, Jill?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways you can reframe. You could say, okay, think of a favourite holiday destination. You know, it could be France. I don't know. What is it about France that makes you? Why do you like it? And you get them to unpack what it is about this holiday that is so beautiful. So how do you feel? How do you feel when you're in France? Well, I feel alive. I feel awake. I feel energized. I feel happy. Okay, so what if you took that energy and applied it to this issue that you've got? What's different now? And suddenly things open up. Whereas before they might feel scared, fearful, heavy, dark about something, doesn't feel like there's much they can do from that position. If suddenly you feel alive, energized, able to do things, suddenly the doors open. Oh, okay, maybe it's not so bleak. You can do that with the holiday, favorite food, piece of jewelry, piece of music. What do you sing along? What makes you feel alive? What brings you awake? And then how would you then apply that feeling to the topic that you're stuck on?
Great, thank you. I think also related to the demonstration coaching that you gave, a question from Laurie. So trust your gut over balancing actual pros and cons. Is that what you are saying?
No. What I'm saying. Well, go on, Matt. Do you want to?
Sorry. Yeah. So I think in that example, that's what Jill was saying to herself, and that's the solution she came to. That we're not saying that you should do that in every circumstance, But that's the conclusion that in that coaching session, Jill's future self was telling her. But coaching isn't saying either. Coaching says allow the person to find their own decision about whether it's gut or balance.
And just say, in my particular case, in that coaching session, I'd already weighed up the pros and cons, and my intuition was saying, do it. So that in that particular case, but Matt's right, it's actually the coachee that you're getting to find their own solution.
I've actually got a question just on that note. So if you're coaching somebody and they come to a conclusion that you feel is morally perhaps not the right way to go, I guess it's the difficult position of coaching, because you're not there to judge and you're not there to give answers. But if you find yourself in a situation where somebody has said something that you don't morally or ethically agree with, how would you deal with that?
So there's an ethical line here around your coaching engagement. So so to give a really good example, if you're developing a coaching culture in the school, then you'd expect that coaching to take place within the ethical policies of that school. And so it's not a conversation. No coaching conversation takes place in a vacuum. It takes place in a context. And as a coach, you've got a responsibility to the context as well as to the client. So again, if you are in a pure coach mode, and you hear something that you think might challenge those ethics, then again, you don't jump in and say don't do that. You raise the challenge of, and what might that mean for the ethics of this situation, or what might be the consequences of that action. So you allow them to think through the potential consequences, and you're always doing your best to keep you out of it as per the level 2 and 3. But you are also mindful that you're coaching in a particular context, and you've got to bear that in mind.
Okay, all right. Here's another one from Vivian. Sometimes we don't realise we are in a negative headspace. We might not realise we want or need coaching. We might even be reluctant to seek coaching, almost happy in our negative mindset. As a school leader or coach, how would you suggest approaching this? Reframing negative mindsets, even though those in it are not open to it. Is it still possible? I'm seeing from this from a fix the problem point of view. So if I'm going to reframe that question, I think, Vivian, what you're asking is, if you're working in an environment where you want to try and introduce a culture of coaching, but there's reluctance because people don't feel they need it. I think I've paraphrased that sort of correctly.
Yeah, I mean, one-to-one coaching, you've got to have be open to be coached. You can't coach someone who's completely closed to coaching. Having said that, if you are trying to introduce a coaching culture into your organisation, to your school, what we have seen happening is that people start to question each other. So if there's a negative comment made by somebody, and I have got this phrase that I use, some people just like to be professionally miserable, and that's their identity. They want to stay there, and I'm not going to be happy, and no matter what you do, I'm not going to look positively on things. But anyway, in an organisation where you've got coaching embedded in it, if a negative comment is made, I've heard and I've seen staff come back to them and go, that's interesting, how does that thought serve you? How does that thought help the rest of the school? How does what you just said move things on for the children? And actually the accountability and questioning starts to happen in the school body. So it kind of little bits start going in, and who knows, there's a cathartic kind of chemical reaction beginning through that questioning. So they may not be open and ready to have one-to-one coaching, but bit by bit, if they understand what openness, challenge, and all of that looks like and sounds like, and how to experience it, then things might move.
Yeah, and I think I'd add to that. I think I'd just add to that quite often there are ways you can, and maybe it's not time for it on this webinar. There are very clear strategies you can use to grow a coaching culture, which in partnership with Infinite we can help you more specifically with if there's questions about that. I think also it's also remembering you in coaching you always meet people where they are, a bit like teaching. So there'll be some people who are absolutely up for it and really want to shift and change, and great, meet them there and transform their thinking. There'll be other people who maybe aren't at a different part of the spectrum, but so meet them where they are, and maybe you just move them a bit. Maybe you just start to move them slightly. What you're not going to achieve straight away is kind of taking your school culture and taking it from here to here with anything. So always trust that you can meet people where they are, and that there's a kind of inbuilt desire in humans to move forward, even if they're really good at resisting it.
Great, good answers, guys. Thank you. And Nancy and Hannah, I hope that covers your questions as well, which are also relating to stubborn and reluctance and developing a whole school coaching culture. I'm just going to read out a couple of things in between questions here, because from Vicky, this was lovely. That was one of the most informative and thought-provoking webinars I have attended. Thank you. Love the real-life coaching example. So thank you, guys. Very well done. Question here from Angie York. Can a person have a few of those voices all in one? For example, perfectionist, workhorse, and how to deal with that? Hi, Angie, by the way. Hope you're well.
And this is gonna seem cheeky. I'm gonna put on my next slide while you answer that, because I know as it comes up to the hour, people have other commitments and there might be questions about what next. So before we answer that question, I'm just gonna jump in and say that we're running a great online course to coincide with the Inset Week with Infinite Learning in the UAE, and all the details are on the screen, and you know how to get in touch with Infinite. So I don't want people to leave without being aware that there is another step if they want to take it. What was the question?
So Workhorse, with the two are together, and how do you deal with it? So yes, I mean, ultimately, all of those 5 voices, the limiting personas, have overlaps. Perfectionist, workhorse, imposter, workhorse, little child. You know, there's lots of overlap. So the key thing is, as Matt's already said, is recognizing that you're feeling it. And the key question is, do I want to feel like this? You ask yourself, do I want to feel like this? If the answer is no, then this is something that you can manage. This is actually a limiting persona voice that's having a bit of a go, and it's got a hold of your thoughts and is making you worry. So in terms of how do you deal with that? Well, it might be really clear that it's something around I've got to do all this work because I need to make it look perfect. So you can see you've got perfectionist and workhorse together, and it's a very common, very, very common conflation with teachers, we find. So it's identifying, it's putting boundaries. The first thing is noticing it. Do I want to feel like this? No, I don't. Okay, what is it that's happening here? What's my behavior? And you're immediately, by saying, no, I don't want to feel like this, you're stepping outside of yourself. And you're going to say, right, I'm working 20 hours a day here, or 17 hours a day. I'm going to put boundaries around that. I am actually going to say, I'm going to work 9 to 5. I'm going to do, or for tomorrow, I'm going to do longer hours just to get that bit done. But then I'm not. I'm going to look after myself. And you just have to take action. You notice, you name it, you take action. And it could be as simple as, I'm going to turn my computer off. I'm going to go for a walk. And it's those simple, you know, and you decide how you do that and what's right for you at that time.
Brilliant, Jill and Matt. Listen, thank you so much. We are sadly out of time, but I think we've covered most of the questions. I'm sorry if I did not get around to asking your question in particular, but I think we've covered most of the general areas that were raised. So again, many thanks to Matt and Jill for sharing your passion, knowledge, your expertise. We've got nearly 60 delegates here who, from the comments that are coming in already, have really, really enjoyed a little taster there. And as Matt said, if you are interested in delving into any of these areas, any and all of them in further detail, please do visit our website, www.infinitelearning.ae. We are offering some inset training that week of August for teams in schools, but we can also put together bespoke packages for any teams in schools. So if you've got any questions, any queries, any interest in any follow-up training, please do get in touch, and Making Stuff Better in Infinite Learning are here to help and support you. Just to reaffirm that you will tomorrow, at 5 o'clock, so it gets sent out a day and an hour after the webinar, you'll be sent a video of this recording along with a certificate of attendance and a small survey, just 2 or 3 questions there. And we would really appreciate your feedback, and it's also an opportunity to let us know what else you might like. Do also check out our webinar page on the website as well. We've got one coming up next Tuesday for early years, so that's our next one coming up. But until then, really, it's a big thank you again to Matt and Jill for giving of their time and sharing their energy and enthusiasm. Thank you again. Thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thanks, guys.